Have you ever stood in a room where your name was on the lease, but somehow, you felt like a guest? My name is Lenora Graves. I was 62 when my daughter-in-law called me a burden, behind a closed door she didn't know I was near. She thought I needed her family to survive. She had no idea I was about to buy the building she worked in. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. I still remember that autumn morning. The kind of gray, heavy sky that makes the whole street look like it's holding its breath. Savannah can be quiet like that in late October, especially just before the first real cold snap. The porch out front was blanketed in red and yellow leaves, clinging to the wooden rails like they didn't want to fall quite yet. I had just poured myself a cup of tea. Chamomile, my usual. The kettle clicked off, and I stood there a moment longer than I needed to. I could hear the sound of Haley's heels tapping down the hallway, sharp, quick, like punctuation marks on the hardwood floor. She never said good morning. Not once in the 2 years I'd lived with them. And to be honest, I'd stopped expecting it. David was in his office, same as always, typing away like his fingers were trying to outrun something. He avoided tension like it might stain him if he stood too close. I knew he could hear it too. The way the air tightened whenever his wife and I were in the same room. But he stayed out of it. Always had. I was reaching for the honey when I heard her voice. Not from the hallway, no, it was louder, clearer. She was on a FaceTime call, and the bathroom door was slightly ajar. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Truly, I didn't. But the words floated out like they were waiting to be caught. "She's still here," Haley said, voice flat like she was reading a grocery list. "I mean, she hasn't even looked for a place. We're basically taking care of her. Like a full-grown child. I swear, I have to remind her every day to rinse the sink or shut the pantry door. It's exhausting." There was a pause, then a laugh from whoever she was talking to. Then Haley again, "It's like, how do I put this nicely? It's like having a roommate who's always home but never pays rent." I stood very still. One hand on the drawer handle. The other holding my tea, now cooling fast. I didn't move. Didn't breathe for a few seconds. My heart didn't race. My face didn't flush. I just cooled. Inside, something shifted. Quietly. Like a thread snapping somewhere deep in the lining of an old coat. She didn't know I was there. She wouldn't have cared if she had. I walked back to the kitchen table, set the tea down, and sat. I watched the steam rise, twist, and disappear. Outside, a squirrel scurried across the porch railing, chasing a dried leaf like it was alive. The sky had turned a deeper gray. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger, either. Not the kind that burns hot and flares out. It was a different kind of emotion, quieter, colder. The kind you can only feel when someone confirms a fear you've carried for too long, that your presence is tolerated, not cherished. That you've overstayed your welcome in a place you helped build, with a son you raised. I sipped the tea. Lukewarm, bitter. Like the words I couldn't say. Like the silence I'd chosen all these years because I thought it made things easier for everyone. Peace, I used to tell myself. I was keeping the peace. But peace kept by swallowing your own worth isn't peace. It's erasure. I thought about David. About how kind he'd been as a little boy. How he used to hold my hand and ask if I was okay whenever he saw me cry. Somewhere along the way, he learned that avoiding discomfort was more important than standing up. And I had let that lesson sink in by never demanding more from him. I closed my eyes. I could still hear her voice. Her words didn't hurt the way sharp things do. They bruised. Softly, deeply. When I opened my eyes, I stood up, walked to the hallway, and opened the old side drawer in the hutch. The one Haley had tried to clean out twice, telling me, "We really don't need extra clutter, do we?" I kept it anyway. Quietly. The drawer was where I'd tucked away pieces of a different life. Inside was a neat folder, some old letters, and one sealed envelope. Summit Grove Partners, confidential, it read across the front. I hadn't opened it in years. It was part of my late husband's estate plan. He had worked with them before his cancer came back. We never had much, but we were careful. Smart with what we did have. He always said, "It's not about what you earn, it's what you protect." I held the envelope in my hand and felt its weight. Not just paper, possibility. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet. But I knew something had shifted. And I wasn't going to ask permission to feel it. I'd spent too long tiptoeing around other people's comfort, folding myself smaller just to fit inside the lines they drew for me. Maybe it was time I drew my own. Maybe it was time to stop asking to stay, and start choosing where I belonged. And with that thought, I tucked the envelope under my arm and went back to finish my tea. It was cold by then, but I drank it anyway. Some things, you finish not because they're warm, but because they're yours. After that morning, something inside me shifted. Not in a dramatic way, not like flipping a switch. More like the slow creak of an old door that had been stuck for years, finally beginning to move. I didn't throw anything out. I didn't slam a door or make an announcement. I just started tidying. Quietly. A drawer here, a shelf there. Things I knew nobody would miss, because nobody ever really looked at them. My photo albums, still in the same box I brought from my old house. A few cookbooks I'd used twice, mostly because the kitchen never really felt like mine. I kept cooking dinner, like always. Haley usually had a salad or smoothie, barely touched the food. David ate like a man trying not to upset anyone, polite, fast, quiet. We talked about weather, traffic, things that didn't matter. I used to hope for more. For real conversation, for eye contact that lasted longer than a blink. But lately, I didn't expect it anymore. I just did what needed doing, like always. Some days I'd catch a look on Haley's face, this flicker of impatience when she saw my grocery bags, or heard the washing machine running at the wrong hour. I didn't say anything, but I started keeping a notebook. I wrote down every bill that came in. Every time I transferred money into David's account for groceries or utilities. He never asked for it. I never explained. I just did it, quietly. Like a shadow taking responsibility for its own footprint. What stung, though, wasn't the money. It was the realization that my being there felt like something they were enduring. I was a detail in the background they couldn't delete but didn't want to acknowledge. Not a mother. Not a person. Just an inconvenience wrapped in politeness. So I started walking more. Every afternoon, I'd take the long way around the block and end up at Magnolia Court. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small office building with old bricks and ivy that had grown a little wild. On the ground floor, there was a cafe. That's where I first met Camille. She ran the place like someone who knew how to read people without asking too many questions. The first time I came in, she handed me a cup of Earl Grey and said, "You look like someone who likes things quiet." I didn't even have to order. I started going back. Same time, same corner table. Sometimes I brought a crossword. Sometimes I just watched people go in and out of the building. A dentist office. A small law firm. A salon on the second floor, Polished Pearl Spa, it was called. Funny name. Never paid much attention to it. One afternoon, Camille came over to wipe down a nearby table. She looked at me and said, almost like she was thinking out loud, "You ever notice how some people can sit in silence and still seem heavy with noise?" I looked up, confused. She smiled gently. That's you, she said. You don't need anyone to know you're sad, but I think someone should. I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't even sure what emotion to feel. Embarrassment? Gratitude? Relief? It had been so long since someone saw me. Not just my face. Me. We talked a little after that. Small things. She told me she used to be a teacher, back before the divorce. That her ex had taken more than just the house. That running the cafe wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. There's a different kind of peace, she said, when something belongs to you. Then, almost offhandedly, she added, building's up for sale, by the way. Not public yet, but the owner's getting tired. You'd never guess from the outside, but it's in good shape. She didn't say it with any weight. Just something she thought I might find interesting. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, as I folded my clothes and quietly took 2 old coats out of the closet to donate, my mind kept circling back to her words. What if I stopped waiting for someone to make room for me, and made space for myself instead? It wasn't about proving a point. It wasn't about revenge. It was something else, something quieter, deeper. A question I hadn't dared ask until now. What would it feel like to belong to something again? There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from swallowing one small insult after another, until your voice gets lost somewhere beneath your ribs. That's the kind of silence I was living in by the time Haley stopped pretending to be polite. It started with small corrections. A dish out of place. A towel folded the wrong way. But then it grew bolder. One afternoon, she came into the kitchen just as I finished wiping the counter. She stared at the cloth in my hand like it was covered in something foul. Just so you know, she said, voice flat but sharp enough to cut, that's the face towel from the guest bathroom. Maybe next time, don't use it to clean the stove. I looked down at the rag. Soft blue cotton. Worn thin from years of wash. I'd grabbed it without thinking. Just a towel. But now it was a declaration of my incompetence. David was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through something on his laptop. He glanced up, then back down, voice barely above a whisper. Come on, Haley, it's just a towel. I'm sure Mom didn't mean anything. I stood there, the rag limp in my hand, watching my grown son try to play the peacekeeper between his wife and the woman who raised him. And it hit me, not for the first time, but harder this time, he had grown used to this. Used to me being the one who absorbed the tension so things wouldn't spill over. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. He was afraid of the ripple. And I taught him that fear by always smoothing the surface. A few days later, he came home with news. Mom, he said, avoiding my eyes, there's a project opening up in Austin. Just 6 months, but it's a good opportunity. They want me to head up the transition team. It'd mean a raise. I smiled. Told him it sounded exciting. Told him he should take it if it felt right. He hesitated, only for a second, then added, I already talked to Haley. She thinks it's manageable. Not a word about how I'd manage. Not even a pause to ask. Haley, of course, didn't wait long. We were standing in the hallway when she brought it up, casually, like she was commenting on the weather. So, with David in Texas and me working double shifts, it might be a good time for you to. I don't know, explore other options? I just don't want you to feel like you're stuck here. I looked at her. She said it with a smile. That kind of smile people wear when they're pretending to be helpful while nudging you toward the door. I gave her a nod. Of course. That makes sense. She seemed pleased. As if we'd agreed on something civilized. But inside? Inside, I was unraveling, and not in the way she thought. I wasn't breaking down. I wasn't hurt the way I'd been before. I was waking up. Not because she wanted me out. Not because David didn't ask if I'd be okay. But because I realized I'd let it happen. Slowly. Gradually. I had allowed my home, my role, my very identity, to shrink so much I was practically invisible. And for what? To be the good mother who didn't cause waves? To be the quiet presence who didn't ask for much? I went into my room that night and pulled the storage bin from under the bed. It was full of old files, tax records, insurance papers, and tucked between them, a folder marked in my late husband's handwriting. Lenora, for future planning. Inside were contacts he'd used when he moved our small investments into a retirement fund, just before he passed. One of them was a firm called Summit Grove Partners. I remembered the name only because he used to say, "If anything ever happens, they'll take care of you." It had been nearly 9 years. I'd never called. But that night, I sat at my desk with the envelope open and my fingers on the phone, heart steady in a way it hadn't been in years. When the woman on the line answered, I said, "Hi, I'm looking to speak with someone about an account that belonged to my late husband." His name was James Graves. She asked for my information, transferred me to someone else, and then, a few minutes later, I heard the words I wasn't prepared for, but needed. "Yes, ma'am, the account is active. Actually, with current growth, you may have more options than you think." More options. Not a lifeline. Not a handout. Options. I sat in the quiet after the call and whispered to no one, "A good mother doesn't walk away, huh?" Maybe a good mother knows when to stop letting herself be erased. The thing about change is, it doesn't always feel like thunder or lightning. Sometimes, it comes in a soft click, the kind that happens when a lock finally turns. That was how it felt when I sat across from the financial advisor at Summit Grove. The office was quiet, lined with bookshelves and soft carpet, and the man across from me had a face that reminded me of someone's favorite uncle. Calm. Reassuring. Direct. He slid a folder toward me, flipping through numbers, charts, and balances I'd forgotten existed. "With your husband's investments, your retirement, and the growth over the last few years, you're in a strong position," he said, tapping one sheet in particular. "If you liquidate strategically and work with the right broker, you could purchase a mid-sized commercial property outright." I blinked. "Outright?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. No loan. No mortgage. You'd own it, clear and simple." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the paper. The numbers didn't lie. My name was printed neatly at the top of every page. But what surprised me more than the money was the feeling that settled in my chest, like something long buried had just taken a full breath. That night, I lay awake, not from nerves, but from clarity. I kept thinking about the tangle of days I'd lived through. The silences, the offhand remarks, the feeling of being both invisible and in the way. And now, I was holding something of my own. Not a memory. Not a role. A future. The next morning, I called the real estate office. Told them I wanted to see Magnolia Court. There was a beat of hesitation on the other end, probably not many women my age making cash inquiries on commercial real estate, but the agent, a young man named Micah, said he'd be happy to set up a walkthrough. We met outside the building 2 days later. I wore my good flats and brought a notepad, even though I wasn't sure what I'd write down. Camille spotted us from inside the cafe and raised one eyebrow as she stepped outside. "You're serious," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Micah gave a little laugh, thinking we were old friends joking around. Camille didn't laugh. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "I thought you were just humoring me." I shrugged. Maybe I was. But I think I've spent enough of my life asking permission. Micah cleared his throat and started the tour. The building wasn't perfect, peeling paint in a few corners, a cracked tile in the stairwell, but the bones were good. Solid foundation. Clean records. A tenant list that included the law office, the dentist, Camille's cafe, and, of course, the spa where Haley worked. I didn't linger on that. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, I signed the paperwork. I brought a lawyer with me, not David's friend, not someone Haley might have recognized. This was mine. The deed was transferred in full, the documents sealed, and the keys handed over with a simple smile. "Congratulations, Ms. Graves," Micah said. "You now own Magnolia Court." I left the office without telling a soul. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about peace. There was something beautiful about holding something entirely yours, untouched by judgment or expectation. A few days later, Camille invited me to sit on the back patio of her cafe. She poured us both a cup of chai, and I could tell she was trying not to ask. "So, you did it," she said finally. I nodded, sipping slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happens when they find out? Won't they think you did it to prove something?" I looked out at the street. A man walked by with a dog in a stroller. 2 college kids argued over a parking spot. Life went on. "Let them think whatever they want," I said. "I've spent so much of my life shrinking myself to make room for everyone else. If they think I bought a building to be petty, that's their burden. I know why I did it. I was tired of feeling small every time I stepped into my own son's house." Camille leaned back in her chair, eyes soft. "You're not small. Not anymore." And just like that, the conversation ended. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because some things don't need repeating. Owning that building didn't change who I was. It reminded me of who I'd always been. It was the first Tuesday of the month. The kind of crisp morning Savannah gets just before the holidays, when people are rushing around with coffee in one hand and scarves tied too tight. I arrived at Magnolia Court early, not because I was nervous, but because I liked watching the light spill across the marble floor in the lobby before it got busy. I'd owned the building for 2 weeks by then. The paperwork was finalized, the keys were mine, and all tenant notifications had gone out, standard form, neutral language, no names mentioned. I didn't want drama. I didn't want attention. I just wanted things to run right. One of those notifications was an email inviting all tenants to a short meeting on the 2nd floor, just to introduce the new property owner. I hadn't even planned to speak. The management rep would lead the meeting. I would simply be present. But I knew Haley had received the email. I saw her read it while I sat across from her in the kitchen. She didn't know I could see her screen. Her expression was somewhere between bored and smug. She muttered, mostly to herself, probably some retired old man with nothing better to do than collect leases. Then she laughed. David was already in Texas by that point. She had the house to herself. I had moved into a small, temporary place until my upstairs unit at Magnolia Court was finished. We weren't speaking much by then anyway. That morning, I dressed in my navy blue slacks and a soft gray sweater. Nothing flashy. No jewelry, no makeup. I wanted to walk in like I belonged there, because I did. The meeting room wasn't fancy, just a long oak table, a few chairs, water pitchers, a folder at every seat. People filed in, the dentist, the paralegal from upstairs, a young woman who managed the cleaning company, and finally, Haley. She didn't look up at first. She was fiddling with her phone, sitting near the middle of the table. Her spa uniform was neatly pressed, her makeup sharp, her expression distant. Then she saw me. Her face didn't change immediately. I think her brain tried to reason with her eyes. But when I walked to the head of the table, set down my copy of the lease amendments, and took a slow breath, something flickered. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then embarrassment. "Good morning, Everyone, I said, voice even, steady. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to say a few words before the property manager walks us through the updates. I recently acquired Magnolia Court, and I look forward to working with each of you to make sure this space continues to serve you well. Lease terms will remain in place, with only a few adjustments to ensure things are fair for both parties. I smiled. Not a gloating smile. A calm one. The kind you give when you know who you are. Haley stared at me like I was speaking another language. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't speak. She didn't even sip her coffee. The meeting went on. People asked questions, nodded, took notes. I answered what I could, deferred the rest to the property manager. And when it ended, they all stood, shook hands, and left with polite thank yous. Except her. She lingered in her chair for a second too long. Then stood abruptly, gathered her things, and rushed out. I didn't follow. I knew she'd come. Sure enough, I was barely unlocking my car when I heard her heels behind me. Why? She asked. I turned around slowly. Why what? I said. You did this to humiliate me. I blinked. I bought a building. It happens to be where you work. That's all. You could have warned me. Would that have changed how you see me? She didn't answer. I studied her for a moment. Her jaw was tight. Her fists were clenched. But her eyes, those gave her away. She wasn't angry. Not really. She was embarrassed. Maybe even scared. Because for once, the version of me she'd created in her head didn't match the reality standing in front of her. I'm not here to interfere with your job, I said. You'll continue your lease. Nothing changes, except that now, I don't have to be invisible for things to be peaceful. Haley swallowed hard. So that's it? You just own the place now? I nodded. Yes. Then I unlocked my car, stepped in, and shut the door gently. As I pulled away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt light. Like I'd stopped dragging 100 pounds of silence behind me. 2 days after the meeting, my phone rang. I knew it would. I just didn't know when. David's name lit up on the screen like it always had, except this time it carried a weight. Like it had been dipped in something I didn't want to touch but couldn't ignore. I sat there staring at it for a moment. Then I picked up. Hey, Mom? I answered quietly. Hi. There was no warmth in my voice, not because I didn't love him, but because love doesn't always show up in the same shape every time. That night, it looked like restraint. He didn't ease in. Haley's upset. I let the silence hang. I didn't rush to fill it, didn't ask why. She says you blindsided her, he continued. That buying the building was about making a statement. About her. I leaned back in my chair by the window. The light outside was slipping behind the tall white cross of the church across the street. Shadows stretched long and quiet on the floor, like they were listening too. I figured she might feel that way, I said evenly. Did you really not think to tell us? Either of us, he asked. I thought about it, I said. And then I didn't. He exhaled hard. Why now, Mom? Why like this? I looked out at the street. A bird landed on the iron railing of my little balcony, its head twitching from side to side, like it was deciding whether to stay or fly. Because I've been silent for a very long time, I said. And I finally realized, being quiet doesn't make people respect you. It just gives them more room to keep walking over you. He didn't say anything. So I kept going. Can I ask you something, David? Yeah. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be a guest in your own child's home? There was a pause. A long one. Mom. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, I said, gently but firmly. But I need you to hear me. I stood in that kitchen, I cooked, I cleaned, I tiptoed around corners just to avoid conflict. And every time Haley made a comment that cut just deep enough, every time she treated me like a burden instead of a person, you looked away. His breath caught. A soft hitch. And I did too, I added. Because I thought I was doing what moms are supposed to do. Keep the peace. But now I see, if keeping peace means losing pieces of yourself, it's not peace. It's something else. Something lonelier. I didn't realize, he said quietly. No, I replied. You didn't. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because truth, even when it's hard, is a form of love. There was another long silence. This one felt heavier. You know what I used to be scared of? I asked. He didn't answer. I was scared you'd see me as a burden. That if I spoke up too much, if I asked for too much space or dignity, I'd lose you. I was afraid that setting a boundary would mean closing a door I wasn't ready to close. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. You're not a burden, Mom. I know that now, I said. But I had to remind myself. That night, I walked down to Camille's cafe. The air was cool, and the sky was that deep velvet blue Savannah gets just before night truly sets in. She was out front, wiping down one of the patio tables with a wet cloth. She looked up the moment she saw me. No words at first, just that look like she already knew. He called, she asked. I nodded. She poured us each a cup of tea and we sat outside under the string lights. There were two men laughing at a nearby table, and someone's dog tied to a post, watching us like it knew this was something important. He asked why I didn't tell them, I said, stirring my tea even though I hadn't added anything to it. Like you owed them that, she said, raising her brow. I smiled. Exactly. She leaned back in her chair, folded her arms like she was settling in for a good story. You know, the fourth floor unit's still available. Bigger space. View of the square. You wouldn't have to walk past me and my burnt muffins every morning. I laughed, really laughed, from somewhere that had been too quiet for too long. Thanks, I said. But I think I'll stay right here. She tilted her head. Why? I looked around, the chipped planter near the door, the smell of sugar from the bakery case, the faint sound of someone playing saxophone 2 streets over. Because I want them to see me, I said. To know I didn't run away. I didn't retreat to make space for their comfort. I'm here. And I'm not sorry about it. She nodded, slow and proud. I spent a long time thinking love meant disappearing, I added. Turns out, love doesn't ask you to vanish just to keep your place. The street lights blinked on, one by one. It was a Wednesday morning, trash pickup day, when she came. I remember because the sound of the bins scraping along the sidewalk had just faded when I heard the knock. Sharp. 3 times. No hesitation. I didn't need to ask who it was. The air outside shifted when she entered buildings. That's something I'd learned the hard way. Someone must have let her in through the cafe downstairs. Probably thinking they were doing a kindness, holding the door open for a woman on a mission. I opened mine before she could knock again. There she was. Haley. Arms crossed. Chin raised. Eyes full of heat. She wasn't in her work clothes this time, no spotless white jacket, no professional calm. Just jeans, a snug maroon top, and her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail like she didn't want even a single strand falling out of line. I figured I'd run into you eventually, she said without greeting. But I didn't expect you to hide behind lawyers and managers. I didn't respond to the bite in her tone. I just stepped aside and motioned to the living room. Would you like to come in? No. I'm not here for small talk. Then say what you came to say. She crossed her arms tighter, like her own bones were the only thing holding her together. You think this makes you powerful? Sitting up here, acting like you're above us. I looked at her, not in anger, but with that quiet recognition you get when someone you once feared now just looks small. I never wanted to be above anyone, I said. But I'm done living beneath everyone. Her mouth tightened. You blindsided us, she said. You didn't tell David. You didn't tell me. You just bought the building, like that was normal. No, I said. It wasn't normal. It was necessary. I walked past her and sat down, not to show comfort, but because I didn't need to prove I could stand in front of her anymore. I've spent years tiptoeing. Shrinking. Making myself smaller so you wouldn't feel threatened. But that's not kindness. That's erasure. She didn't sit. Just kept glaring. You think buying this place fixes what's between us? No, I said. I think it fixes what's inside me. And that's more than enough. She let out a short, bitter laugh. So now what? I work in your building. Am I supposed to kiss the ring? I shook my head. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to speak to me. That's why I've set boundaries. From now on, all communications go through the building manager, just like every other tenant. I paused to let that land. And I'm adding a clause to the lease agreements, mutual respect. That means no personal attacks, no games, no thinly veiled digs. From either side. Her eyes narrowed like she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the usual ground. You're serious, she finally said. As a heartbeat, I replied. For a moment, she just stood there. Looking. Like she was trying to find the old woman she used to push past in the hallway. But that woman was gone. Or maybe, she'd simply stepped out of the shadows and into her own skin. She left without saying goodbye. After the door shut behind her, I walked to the window. The street below was bathed in late morning sunlight. Camille stood under her cafe-striped awning, talking to a delivery driver. She caught sight of me and raised her hand. I returned the wave, slow and steady. I sat down at my small round table and opened my laptop. It took a while to find the words, not because they were hard, but because they were honest. I wrote David an email. Not angry. Not defensive. Just the truth. I told him I loved him. That I always would. But I couldn't keep giving up parts of myself just to be tolerated under someone else's roof. I told him what it had felt like, being there, invisible. Spoken over. Treated like a misplaced item no one wanted to throw out but no one cared to keep. And I told him what it felt like now, to be home, finally, even if I was the only one who knew it. I ended the message with one line. I'm still your mother, but I'm no longer a shadow in anyone's home. I clicked send. There was no dramatic music. No thunderclap or applause. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of leaves outside, and me, breathing in a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I didn't win anything that day. But I stopped losing myself. And that, for me, was enough. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet the way only late afternoons can be in Savannah, when the sun lingers a little longer on the brick walls, and the breeze through the trees sounds like an old tune no one remembers the name of. I was standing at my window, third floor, holding a cup of Earl Grey. The same window I'd stood at the day I moved in, only this time, everything felt different. The apartment wasn't large. Just 2 bedrooms, a living room with creaky floorboards, and a kitchen where the cabinet doors stuck sometimes when it got humid. But it was mine. Not borrowed. Not shared. Not someone else's idea of charity. Just mine. The sunlight hit the table just right, warming the edge of the cup in my hand. I watched people pass by on the sidewalk below, young moms pushing strollers, a man walking his beagle, a teenager adjusting his earbuds and nodding to a beat only he could hear. I heard the soft ping of an email from my phone on the counter. It was from the property manager, routine stuff. A request had come in from Polished Pearl Spa. AC unit on the second floor out again. Tenant Haley Graves submitted request via portal. Professional tone. No issues to note. I read it twice, then smiled. There was no snide comment, no side message sent to me directly, no trace of the passive aggression that used to curl beneath her words like smoke. Just business. She hadn't apologized. But she hadn't attacked me since that day either. And honestly, I didn't need the apology. Some changes don't announce themselves. They just arrive, settle in, and shift the temperature. Haley had learned, in her own way, to respect the rules of a space she could no longer control. And that was enough for me. Not a grand victory, but a quiet one. One I felt deep in my chest every time I walked down those halls and wasn't met with a sideways glance or thinly veiled sigh. I'd heard from Camille earlier that week. She told me the salon girls had started treating me differently, not out of fear or flattery, but with a kind of curiosity. A softness. They'd figured out I wasn't some sad old woman taken in by her generous daughter-in-law. I was the landlord. I was the woman who kept the lights on and the plumbing running. I was, quietly, someone to reckon with. No one gossiped. No one made speeches. But the silence between people changes when the truth is no longer something you have to explain. Later that evening, Camille knocked on my door, holding a warm tray of apricot tarts. I baked too many, she said, though we both knew she'd baked them for me. Consider it a tiny housewarming redo, she added with a wink. Or just a celebration. I smiled, took the tray, and stepped back so she could come in. Celebrating what? I asked, already knowing. She leaned against the counter, popping a tart in her mouth. You, finally living where you were always supposed to. Not just in a place. But in yourself. I paused, then said, it's not really a celebration of where I'm living. She raised a brow. It's more a quiet thank you, I said. To myself, for no longer trying to stay in places where I was never truly welcome. She didn't say anything. Just reached for another tart and nodded. A few weeks after that, I got an email from David. He didn't side with Haley. He didn't ask me to fix anything or come back. He just said, Mom, you gave up more than I ever realized. You did it so quietly, I didn't even notice. I think I'm starting to now. I'm trying to be a better son, not for you to love me, but because I love you. I read it 3 times. Then closed the laptop and left it unanswered. Not out of coldness. But because sometimes, love doesn't need to rush back with words. Sometimes, letting someone grow means not stepping in to cushion the fall. I still call him. We still talk. But it's different now. There's space. There's respect. There's a mother, and there's a grown man, both learning how to see each other clearly again. The next morning, I stood on my balcony with a fresh cup of tea, watching the live oak sway in the distance. The world felt wide again. My world. I didn't feel loud. I didn't feel grand. But I felt present. And that was enough. I am still me. And I've learned, I don't need to be pitted to be loved. I just need to be. If you're still with me, thank you for listening. You know, at my age, I've learned that love without respect isn't love at all, it's quiet erosion. Maybe you've felt that too, in your own way. I don't need to be anyone's lesson or inspiration. I just hope my story reminds you. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be young to begin again. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll join me next time. I've got more to tell, and maybe you do too.